How's it going, Baird?
Oh, it's bullshit. Somebody here figured out the cold-played thrash ball. Now it's all, oh, Coltrane, tell us all about that play again. And, hey, number 83, sign my shirt. Where the hell are you guys?
Oh no everyone, it's another episode of Gay Station 64, and in fact this might be our first official controversy here on the channel, because I have been playing Gears of War, the original, on an original old battered up Xbox 360. None of your X-Bones or your Series X emulation nonsense. We're playing it old school, not even on the enhanced PC port remaster thing you can get, whatever it's called. This is my first time playing any Gears of War, and it's my first time playing the original. That's a redundant statement. What I meant is that I've finished for the first time a Gears of War game, having never played one until a few weeks ago. It's a franchise that I just completely missed, being a dreaded PlayStation person back in the day, which is always a sentence that scares me that I can say that now about 360 and PS3 stuff back in the day, and the Wii as well, obviously. Especially now, the new generation, the 9th console generation has just started. It horrifies me that a game like Gears of War is about 15 years old. What happened there, Obviously, the Wii and the PS3 came out about a year later, but whatever. Gears of War, the first one, I'm literally holding it in my hand. I like to physically have the boxes and bash them against the microphone for your hearing pleasure. Some ASMR going on here. ASMR smashing video game boxes against the microphone extravaganza. The reason I say it's controversial is that I'm going to have to put a lot of asterisks on my opinions today, I think. This is going to be one of those, let me play a beloved classic and have mixed opinions on it sort of videos. Because it is a video game that influenced many, many games, including, funnily enough, something I played for the first time also earlier this year, which is Warhammer 40k Space Marine. That was a game that came out several years later and draws infinite comparisons to Gears of War. And it's also something I considerably prefer over Gears of War, but we'll get into that. The point is, Gears of War, the first, numero uno, primary, number one Gears of War, the original. It's a fine old game. It's fine. It's kind of like going back, and this is a flattering comparison, it's kind of like going back to Lord of the Rings. If you've never read or watched Lord of the Rings, and then you consume all this other fantasy media, and then if you'd never even heard of Lord of the Rings before, you might think that Lord of the Rings is boring and predictable, but it's hard to turn that context off and go back to the original context of this being something. Lord of the Rings has influence from a lot of existing mythologies, obviously, but it's still one of the most influential books, probably, of the last century, certainly in a fiction standpoint. And it's kind of, I've definitely hyped this up too much now, but it's kind of a similar situation with Gears of War, where I can play this in December 2020 for the first time with its scary lime green Xbox box design that I've always had mixed opinions on. It's very striking, it's very Mountain Dew, makes me think of Doritos and other gamer foods. Why do they always make the Mountain Dew and Doritos is the stickiest, nastiest food to get all over your controllers? I don't understand why it's supposed to be gamer food. As a marketing executive, gets paid more money than me to come up with these things. So, point is, it's a good video game. It's fine. It's perfectly good. And for all I know, there's 5 other Gears of War games. Yeah, there's Gears 1 to 5, and then there's also Judgment, and then there's something called Tactics, which is whatever. It very feels of its time, and it's kind of one of the ways in which I have come to accept that 360 and PS3 stuff is retro now is if you play a lot of early 360 or PS3 games, 7th generation games, they do feel their age, and kind of game design evolution is something that can happen so gradually. That's only when you go back. It's not just the technology, it's the design as well. Gears of War was so influential, but after 10, 15 years of games doing that same sort of cover shooting thing, even something like Uncharted, I would argue, holds up better than Gears of War from just a couple of years later. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but I'm going to stick with the positives before we deep dive, just clit deep into some controversy. I want to really kind of... I'm not sure why I went for such a foul imagery there, I'm sorry. We're straight to the toilet humour, I'm sorry. Just before we go genital deep into Gears of War, the bad points, I want to stick to the positive. Because I did like this game. I did have a fun time. And this is going to sound like a weird backhanded compliment, but I enjoy that it's so short. Obviously, you can't play the original Gears of War on a 360 online anymore without some sort of elaborate homebrew setup, I imagine. So I'm strictly speaking single player here. I really like that you can apparently play the campaign in co-op, which is something that sadly is no longer as common. I think it's making a bit of a comeback. Be it local or over the internet, I really like when games let you play the story mode in some fashion with another person. Even like Bloodborne has a weird, From Software games have that weird arbitrary co-op system that's never really been very intuitive, but that's still a lot of fun to play through with a friend. And I'm glad that Gears of War gives that option, like a lot of older Call of Duties do that as well. I played World of War with someone once, that was pretty good. I feel it sounds like I'm grasping for positive things to say, but I'm not. There are things in this game which I'm surprised haven't been ripped off more, like I can't think of hardly any other games that do the active reload thing that Gears of War has, which is a surprisingly, like, in most shooters you press the reload button and your gun reloads, and maybe you can interrupt the reload, or maybe something attacks you while you're reloading. Reloading is meant to be a tactical, like, when do I have time to reload? Is it worth reloading early if I have a moment to do it in between shooting? In Gears of War, they take it to a much more interesting level where you press reload and then a little kind of, one of those like press the button at the right time mini games happens. If you press the button at the right time, you reload normally. If you cock up the timing, Marcus will go shit, and he'll like take 3 times as long to reload. But if you get it perfect, if you get the timing perfect, you'll actually get like a super reload, which happens instantaneously, and you also do more damage with all the bullets in that clip, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's a very cool idea from a completely meta-fictional video gamey sense. It's a very cool mechanic, and the fact that that hasn't been ripped off nearly as much as the cover mechanics is really strange to me. If you play Grand Theft Auto 4 or even 5, they still have that sort of Gears of War, Uncharted cover mechanic gameplay for the most part. Obviously you have driving as well in Grand Theft Auto, but hardly any game that I've played, at least, has used a similar sort of active reload thing. And I think Space Marine might do it, but I can't. If that's my imagination lying to me, I can't even think what the other game that does it is. You see, it's strange that everything else has been so influential and that interesting mechanic has not been. Coincidentally, funnily enough, I've just noticed, the Gears of War logo, like the gear with the skull, I'm actually wearing my Mad Max Fury Road t-shirt, and it's got the Immortan Joe skull, like a flaming branded skull thing, and it does look quite similar to that's a genuine coincidence, I've just noticed. That's quite fun. But Gears of War, it's like, one thing I will say, the whole cover mechanic gimmick, well, it's not really a gimmick in the sense that, I guess at the time maybe it felt more like a gimmick, but the cover shooting, they do really actually force you to use cover. You will die quite quickly if you're between cover. Another way in which the game feels older is that it is quite clunky to move around and swap between cover compared to some later games. But it's perfectly functional. It works. I've played enough of these sort of shooters that it works. It makes sense. Um, but it is kind of I find myself comparing this to Space Marine a lot, probably because that's just another vaguely similar game I played this year for the first time. But one thing I definitely prefer in Space Marine is that you don't need to roll. There is no cover mechanic per se. You only just kind of manually hide behind things, like you would in an older, like in Doom. There's no cover mechanic. You just have to stand behind a wall if you want to dodge bullets. It's like that. Gears of War, I appreciate that if they're going for this cover mechanic thing, they do actually force you to use it pretty much. And on a related note, I am surprised that initially there's like 3 difficulties when you start a new game. And the middle one is called Hardcore. And it is surprisingly, it's a very solid challenge. It's the sort of thing I could probably beat if I was determined enough. But I personally couldn't be asked. When I've died multiple times on the first level, I'll often go like, oh Christ, this is going to be one of those games, isn't it? And I was happy to restart and just go back to the casual difficulty because I knew it was an older game and I just wanted to have that experience of getting through it at a decent pace. I could always come back and do it on the harder mode if I wanted to. I'm very much of that opinion these days. I often just want to get through a game. It's only a rare, special game that I really like Hitman, which I'm now, for some reason, obligated to mention in every video. It's only something I really like Hitman, that I'll go back and try and master to some extent. So that is something I'll definitely probably mention again. If you're like me and you've never played Gears of War before, I would seriously recommend considering that you try it on the casual mode, and you can always go back to the hardcore setting because it does actually. There are a couple of specific sections in the game where I'm very glad I went on the casual mode because it just seemed like there was so little wiggle room of like, oh, you have to get to this objective within 30 seconds. So I'm like awkwardly trying to barrel my way over these chest-high walls, and it just really seems like there's no time to run and gun, and you've got a very narrow window to beat the objective. I probably should have mentioned this right at the beginning, but one way in which there's definitely... I don't think it was a launch title, let me just Google that, but it's a very early 360 game if it isn't a launch title. I was actually playing King Kong on the 360. No, it's not a launch game, at least not for the original release date, because it came out 2006, so it wasn't a launch game. But it's still an early 360 game. I think I just assumed it was a launch title for a long time because it came out so early. And also I get it confused with Resistance Fall of Man in my head sometimes on PS3, which was a launch title, at least in some parts of the world. I get that confused too because we in Europe got the PS3 several months later than a lot of people. We had more launch games in some regions, and that sort of thing always confounds my memory trying to go back and remember. Like sometimes I forget that Mario Odyssey wasn't actually a Switch launch title because it was one of the most high-profile early games, and it did come out that same year. It just came out like 6 months after launch. Anywho, that's a tangent, but something I meant to say, and I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video probably, is something that ages Gears of War quite badly, if you ask me, is the story or lack thereof. And it's an action game. Story was never going to be the focus. If you try and think of action games, how many of your favorite action games actually have good, competently told stories? I bet it's less than half of them easily, When I play Time Splitters, I don't play it for the story. I play it because running around as a duck with 2 shotguns is good fun. But Gears of War really confounded me because I get this, and I only got a 360 for the first time this year, so I'm still kind of in that honeymoon period. I open the box, I look at all the weird lime green shit, it's fun. I get the manual out, which is still a novelty because you don't really get manuals hardly ever anymore. So this is still like the early 360 times where the manual actually had full color and some backstory and pictures, some actual interesting details in here. But I swear to God, this is one of those games where there's more story. There's There's like 1 page, 3 paragraphs of story summary in the beginning of this manual. That is more story than is made clear in the entire game. I was almost tempted to just read it at the beginning, you know. Literally, most of this stuff is referenced in the game, and I watched all the cutscenes. I didn't skip nothing. There weren't any audio logs or anything. If there's more story hidden in that disc somewhere, I couldn't find it. If you just played this without reading that paragraph in the manual, you would have so little idea what was going on. I read this description and thought, oh, that sounds quite interesting. So these locust things popped up from under the ground one day, and that like is like an apocalypse that happens. So humanity moves to like a continent or something that has a very solid bedrock that's hard to drill through. I'm like, that's interesting. That's an unusual. There are some parallels, funnily enough, with Resistance Fall of Man again. Just the idea of these weird creatures living underground. But it's a cool. Obviously, this came slightly earlier. Actually, they came out almost exactly the same time. Going to think of it. Never mind. I liked the setup. You know, it was a good setup for an action game. I thought, well, I look forward to hearing some more details in the game. Unfortunately, there was considerably less information in the game than is in this not even a full tiny little page of text here. More effort went into the storytelling in this manual and the pictures than actually telling the story. And, you know, it's an action game. I can forgive this. One of my actually, no, I'll go back on that actually. I was about to say, I don't mind the lack of story, but I think when the game is so repetitive and the innovation of the gameplay at the time has now become somewhat hackneyed and predictable, it is a shame that the story is also an initially interesting premise that's barely even mentioned in the game. This is what gets me. Even this premise is barely explained in the game, let alone any sort of further interesting details. And that is why I'm surprised that this isn't a launch game, because it has that launch game sort of, you know, oh, we'll fill in the story later, and then they never got round to it because they ran out of time, sort of thing. And I'm not holding this against it overly, because for the 10th time it is an action game, and it's probably something that people mostly played in multiplayer as well. But I kind of, it's strange that the manual got my expectations up in that way. I'm not usually someone who's like, oh yeah, let's read the manual. It's only because of it being the 360 and I've never had one before. It's like, oh, this is a famous Gears of War game I never got around to playing, and I was always like distantly envious of. I'll read this. So I'm surprised to be able to say that the yin to this yang, which is the Resistance Fall of Man on PS3. I think Resistance has a better story and better world building, and they're very similar. They're very similar. I didn't intend going into this to constantly compare Gears of War to Resistance, but I did find myself thinking about the comparison, and looking back, I think they were compared quite a lot at the time. One thing Gears of War has that Resistance doesn't is the fucking chainsaw bayonet on the gun, which is very cool. However, I think Space Marine again has spoiled me, because if you know anything about 40k, you'll know that Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, they have literal chain swords, which are swords which have chains. It's a chainsaw that is also a sword. So you can go vroom, 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 and there's like 5 different fatality animations you can do on the orcs, just over and over again. It's kind of interesting to play an early Gears of War game and then to play a later 360 game that has clearly taken inspiration from Gears of War, although obviously 40k as a franchise existed before Gears of War. It's just that there aren't a whole lot of great 40k games. They vary hugely in quality. This is a tangent, but would my opinion of this have been much better had I not played Space Marine about 3 months ago? Maybe, I don't know. It's funny. I don't regret playing Gears of War. I definitely don't. I may regret having bought I've bought like all 4 360 Gears of War games in a bundle for about a tenner. I slightly regret doing that because now I feel this kind of obligation to play the rest of them. I don't know. Maybe they're all considerably better. I went in with this open mind, and I don't hate it. I enjoyed it, but I was definitely ready for it to be over. And it's strange how it doesn't really have very good pacing. Like, it didn't really feel like it was built, because I didn't really have any idea what was going on. It didn't really feel like it was building up to anything. Like in the first mission, and frankly, there's such an old and well-known game. I'm just going to spoil what little plot there is, because it's like there's so little plot. I think Independence Day has more plot than this. You know, oh, we've got to stop the aliens. Don't worry, I'll hack the alien ship with my Apple Mac. Don't worry, it's a virus that I made. So they introduced this locust boss, whose name I'm not sure is ever mentioned, except that the text says that he's called Ram. Or Ram? He just, you know, I don't find the locust very interesting looking to begin with, and this guy barely looks... If he didn't have like a little cutscene with dramatic music and a special name that comes on the screen, I would have never noticed that he was like... You know, there's this bad guy, he's like, oh, he's the bad guy, he killed your friend or something in the intro. And then he sort of turns up once in another cutscene, and then he's just the boss at the end, where you sort of... And this is not a sort of gameplay style that lends itself well to boss fights, so you just kind of awkwardly hide behind a wall and shoot at him, and he has these bats that come at you, and they attack you if you go if you get out of the light, they kill you. Which was probably I called it the Ravenholm level, even though it's not Ravenholm. Probably the best part of Gears of War is the second chapter, I think, where you're in this like city after dark, and there are these bat things that come out after dark, and they kill you if you go in the darkness. So they came up with some quite clever ways, like you have to shoot these gas tanks to create fire, to create light, so you can move past and be safe from the darkness. And there's a bit where you have to like set one on fire and then like roll the car down the hill and follow the car so you're in the light bubble. You see, there's a surprising level of like just a very simple puzzle, but for an action game it's surprising and nice to have a little thing like that. And I did like how some of the chapters like that had a little sort of mechanical gimmick. Like that only really appears in that one chapter, but it's a consistent thing throughout the chapter. There's another bit actually where you're in like a turret above the street, and your buddy is moving through the street shooting at things, and you have to keep the turret... Well, it's not a turret, it's just a light. You have to keep the light on him as he's moving, so that he's not attacked by the bats. You see, that's a very, very brief, barely counts as a puzzle, very cool little gimmicky sequence. But it just made me laugh how that one Gears of War chapter probably has more interesting light mechanics than Dark Souls 2, which was partially marketed as having this... I think Dark Souls 2 was marketed as having this whole torch mechanic where you had to light up the darkness, but then I think halfway through development they realised the idea wasn't working properly, so they just scrapped it for the most part. But it made me laugh how Gears of War had one chapter that did more with that idea than the entirety of Dark Souls 2, and then you get into more subjective stuff, like I don't like the Gears of War art style, which surprises me because, as I said, something else I discovered this year was Warhammer 40k, which I have a weird appreciation for. I can't even explain it. I think 40k kind of has this... It has a sort of cringe barrier that you have to get through, where everything in 40k is 10,000 years old and the size of Mars, and has an ancient legacy and prophecy, and you know, you can never just have a monster in 40k. It has to be the ancient warp infused remains of the Emperor's left toenail. It has to be some dramatic thing. But when you kind of accept that as like your suspension of disbelief price of entry, I think 40k is really cool. It's really over the top, and so long as you understand that pretty much all the factions in 40k are meant to be terrible authoritarian nightmares, you know. The Imperium are not the good guys, because there are no good guys in 40k, really. One or two of the factions are slightly less evil. The Imperium gets all the books, but it's not actually a nice place to live for 99% of people in this fictional space universe. Anywho, my point is, I like 40k. I like the other thing about the big beefy dudes in oversized armor. However, I don't like the Gears of War art style. I find it really weird how this, you know, I'm pretty sure it's... If it's not set on Earth, it's not made clear that's not set on Earth. I'm pretty sure it's just a version of Earth where these monsters have appeared from underground. If it's an alien planet, it's not communicated at all that it's not meant to be Earth. So you're on Earth with these very human-looking humans, except all of the dudes in Gears of War are like... The obvious joke is steroids. And it really just is like, it's like the absolute extreme that a human body could be just full of muscle. They're all like 7 foot tall, and this one guy's arms are bigger than his head, you know. But then all the women are like a third the size. It's really, really creepy. It's weird. It's not just the armor. It's not just the armor. And remember, in 40k, there's a, you know, Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines in 40k, they are not regular humans. They are genetically bred, cybernetically enhanced super soldiers. They're also like holy crusaders, you know. Horrible authoritarian nightmare, as you know, in 40k. But there's a reason why they're all 8 foot tall and muscly, and they have extra organs as like backups. If their heart gets shot out, they have a backup heart and stuff. These dudes in Gears of War, it's never mentioned that they are anything other than just like really muscly dudes. What I find worse than that, though, is the enemies, the Locust, especially within the first hour or two, but this never really went away. The art style is so muddy and grey, and the Locust just looks so similar at a glance in the middle of battle to your friends. There were multiple occasions where I was accidentally shooting my friends for a second. They went, "Oh crap, you're not a Locust." Because they're constantly flanking you, you know, you see something at the corner of your eye and you shoot it, you know. Clearly I'm just so pro at video games. My reflexes were too fast, and I shot my friend. I didn't get a game over or anything, luckily. That would have been annoying, but I just don't find most of the Locust very interesting enemies to fight. And it was all the kind of inhuman enemies that were much more interesting to look at, I think. I also find it weird, and this is, you know, maybe I'm taking the world of Gears of War too seriously, but I find it weird that these subterranean creatures just look and sound so human, including speaking English. And again, suspend your disbelief, I know, but I wanted to suspend my disbelief and give it a chance, and, you know, it's just... The game has a sense of humour. I was about to say it takes itself too seriously, but it doesn't, because it does have a surprisingly good sense of humour. Marcus is quite deadpan, but there's this guy called Cole, who is just... He's just always quipping, and it's as soon as you find him, you know he's going to be like the comedy relief character. And there's this one bit where him and this other guy are like hanging out with some other people to kind of get their help while you're running around shooting things. And Marcus rings them up like, "How you doing, guys?" And I think it's Dom. He's like, "Marcus, Cole, they've worked out he used to be a footballer, and now they're asking him about all his football records. And I think I'm going mad, Marcus. Oh, Cole, let me see your muscles. Oh, have sign my sports jersey, Cole." You know, yeah, there's a lot of dialogue like that, and that was surprisingly entertaining. But that is by far the most personality that the game has, and I can forgive the fact that everything looks grey and brown and a bit blurry, because it was a early 360 game, and as was the style at the time. They all had these big onions on their belts. No, they had brown and grey textures, and everything looks like It looks like a depressing Halo, basically. It's like Halo on a bad day. It's funny looking back how Halo is so much more brightly coloured than a lot of the games that it was inspired by. No, that inspired. No, yeah, yeah. I think that makes sense. That were inspired by it. Yes, yes. I got that the wrong way around the first time. Um, I can feel my rambling. One weird thing is there's these berserker monsters, and they're kind of interesting, but they also kind of pop up too many times. For the whole gimmick is that they're blind, and you have to kind of wander around. You can only usually blow them up with a certain gun that summons like a laser from orbit, and that's vaguely fun. But then it kind of happens 5 or 6 times, maybe 4 or 5 times, and it's just kind of, oh, there's another one. Time to do pretty much the same thing again. And I think that was when the fact that you have this enemy that charges at you and you have to get out of the way, and because you're not allowed to, if you do anything other than walk, it hears you. So it just really highlighted how clunky the controls were, and on 2 or 3 occasions I got killed because I tried to dive out the way and accidentally got stuck on a wall instead and just got splattered. But these are very nitty-gritty problems, but this is my, I want to make it clear that I don't regret playing Gears of War, and I'm not even sure if it's necessarily... I'm not sure if disappointment is even the right word, because this is pretty much what I expected. I guess I'm just surprised, because this is the original compared to so many derivative games that I played later on, at least the ones that are on PS3 mostly. I think something like Uncharted, which I have my own problems with, I think Uncharted isn't as funny as it thinks it is a lot of the time. But I played an Uncharted game this year, and honestly, despite the gameplay being functionally pretty similar, I think Uncharted just has more going on. I think that's the key to it, actually. Uncharted has, puzzles and more of that dialogue, even though Gears of War does have a lot of that. I can forgive Uncharted's gameplay being fairly average because there's other stuff going on. Every time I got bored with the combat, there'd be another puzzle, or just something pretty to look at, I don't find Nathan Hale a very interesting character. He's just he's like Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford, by which I mean an infinitely worse Harrison Ford. And I'm glad that Nathan Hale has gone on to do more memorable characters, because I've never actually liked Nathan Drake very much. Fun fact about Uncharted: the original Uncharted is the first and one of the only games I've ever got all the trophies for. Trophies/achievements. There are very few games I care enough to... I mean, I've never been a trophy hunter, really. That makes me sound like someone who murders endangered animals. I shouldn't use that phrase ever again. But I guess it's just an interesting case study, because other than Resistance, which is a franchise that is just dead now, Uncharted is a more mechanically similar game, to be fair. Resistance is a first-person shooter, whereas Uncharted uses that third-person cover shooting. I feel the need to reiterate, I don't regret playing Gears of War, and I had a decently fun time. And the fact that it's so short does improve it, in the sense that, as strange as it sounds, I was quite looking forward to just playing this again without... I like to replay games on the easy mode while listening to podcasts and stuff. And strangely, I was quite looking forward to doing that, because it is a decently fun action-adventure. It's just that everything surrounding the action was so forgettable. I didn't find the enemies very interesting, despite the interesting setup. I didn't find the characters... The characters were shallow but fun. Yeah, okay, there's no character related... That was one of the strangest things, actually. And you read... I'm going to get it out again. You read the manual, and in the little intro paragraph it says the reason that Marcus is in prison at the beginning is to do with, he disobeyed orders and rescued his dad or something. And I'm like, okay, so that kind of seems to set up, who is his dad? Is he some sort of, general or something? I don't know. I think he's a scientist, actually. But then, in the penultimate chapter, you spend a lot of time in and around the family estate where his dad lived. And strangely, that chapter has noticeably less dialogue than the other ones, which is why this game feels unfinished to me in some places. Like, there's just the lack of plot, even when plot seems to be staring you in the face, felt strange. You know, it's the way in which this game shows its age the most, I think, is that you play Uncharted sometimes and they won't shut up. You know, they won't stop giving you some commentary as to what's going on, almost to the point of parody, quite frankly. But then you play Gears of War, and this character is in his family house, and yet barely remarks on it. You know, it's strange. I kept waiting for some sort of story revelation, but there really wasn't. It's like the entire game's story is, oh, we've got to get this bomb and scan the locust tunnels and then blow it up with the bomb. And then it's like, oh, we lost the bomb. Oh, we got the bomb back. Oh, we lost the device that we're going to scan the tunnels with. Oh, we got the device back. Oh, it turns out the device didn't work because the tunnels are bigger than expected. But don't worry, we'll go to my dad's house, and he conveniently has a much better scan of the tunnels. Okay. And now we're on a train for some reason, which has the bomb on it. Oh, and there's that, like... There's that boss locust from the beginning of the game, who, like, I genuinely would not have remembered at all if he didn't have a name and a slightly different design. It's strange. It's strange. I'm looking at the multiplayer section in the manual here, and it definitely looks like there's more going on there. You know what this art style reminds me of, actually, is Arkham Asylum. I never liked it in Arkham Asylum either. It has that very... all the dudes are so huge. And then there's all the casual sexism where the women are so tiny, and like there's that famous thing actually where someone swapped Catwoman and Batman's models around. So Catwoman is just standing there all stoically with her chest out, and Batman is like constantly waving his hips and just rubbing himself all over Catwoman. That's extremely funny. Yeah. Video games, source of casual sexism since 2006? No, that's not fair. It's becoming my mantra today, but I do not regret playing Gears of War. I just wonder, and I'm going to ask my friend who has played some Gears of War, I think. It's kind of the opposite situation almost. I played this because I liked the gameplay and I wanted to play it, but I probably would have stopped playing it if I didn't enjoy the gameplay. Halo is a series I played back in the day, but only the first two. But I'd like to play Halo 3 because there is a gem of an interesting story in Halo 2 that's kind of just all over the place, really. But you know, I've always said that in the first Halo, the flood level is very divisive amongst people, and it goes on a while, the whole flood sequence, but I think it's a good twist that you kind of go into this facility and there's all this shit everywhere, and you're like, oh no, there's bodies everywhere, what happened here? And then you open a door and this whole new kind of enemy just pours out that's like totally unlike anything you've faced before, and most of the rest of the game is spent trying to get away from this new enemy. There's so many of them, they never stop, you know. And I think moments like that is what Gears of War is kind of lacking, where everything sort of merges together. There was, you know, the train level. I don't know if the end of the game is actually worse than the beginning, or if it just kind of became less novel as I got used to the game. But I swear that second chapter in the Ravenholm sort of city was by far the most interesting part of the game, and that was when I was like, I feel like this story is going somewhere in an interesting setting. You know, I felt like it was going somewhere, and it never really did. It's strange. It's strange. I don't know. I won't immediately play Gears of War 2. I got a whole bunch of other old games for the 360 there, so I'll probably get around to those first. Actually, speaking of Halo, I literally just today I now own all of the Halo games on 360 except for the is it Halo Wars? Is it Halo Tactics? Or is it Gears of War Tactics? Whatever the strategy one is. I don't have that because I don't really care enough. I'll just play XCOM if I want a strategy game on a console. I recommend the Switch version of XCOM 2, incidentally, because it has War of the Chosen expansion. XCOM 2 is one of my favourite strategy games ever. And War of the Chosen is such an amazing expansion that just makes the game twice as good. It's huge. It's just like with Jurassic World Evolution though on Switch. It just has that problem where it's download. It's not that it's download only. It's that even if you get a physical version of it, it requires a download. So it's essentially download only. And it was 60% off on the eShop, and I couldn't resist. Couldn't resist. It's terrible. I'm going back to Gears of War talk now. Okay, I guess the question is for the ending. Do I recommend Gears of War on 360? Now, well, do I recommend any version of it? As a single player experience, I recommend it if... this sounds strange. I recommend it if you're a weirdo like me. I played Gears of War because I never did, and I appreciate how influential and famous it went on to be. It's a shame that I don't have an X-Bone, because again, this is why I wonder if the later games have a more interesting story, because it's cool that Gears 5 has a different main character, has a lady as the main character, which is just cool to me, because Gears of War traditionally is like, it's the Mountain Dew traditional hyper macho fantasy video game like Halo, and it's cool that the you know, and it's not even a spin-off. Gears 5 is like the next big Gears of War game. It's cool that they have a lady as the main character, partly because Marcus isn't a very interesting character, but I played Gears of War because of its kind of historical significance, and at least I can say I've played a Gears of War and it was alright. I don't regret playing it. This might have blown my mind at the time, but honestly, I think something like Space Marine is just so much more fun, and maybe it's because I like 40k, the setting, I'm just saying that. But I think... I just felt, you know, I didn't feel... I felt so fragile a lot of the time in Gears of War, just hiding behind cover. I was like, oh no, don't shoot me, please, I'm behind my wall, you know. Whereas in 40k, you're actively encouraged. It's like the new Doom games. You're encouraged to run out and kill things to get your health back. And you do all these fatalities with your chainsword. There's some sections where you have a jetpack and this big axe, and you're just like stomping things, like ground pounding. It's great, you know. I would so much rather play Space Marine again than Gears of War 1 at least. I want to do my research and see if the later games have a more interesting story, because I guess that says a lot that I'm really torn on whether I'm going to end up playing these games that I own. I'm not sure if I'll get around to playing them, because the gameplay is just fine, and the story was disappointing after like an interesting setup. So if the later games don't deliver on the story, I'm not sure what there is to make me want to play the rest of these. I've played a Gears of War now. And to end on a positive note, I am happy. I'm happy that I've played a Gears of War. I'm just sad that I didn't like it as much as... You know, going in with an open mind, this console war is long and truly over. The 360 and the PS3, that's old history. I'm in this honeymoon period, like I said, with my 360. And I wanted to play, and I did. I wanted to play this kind of game I never got to play because I never had a 360. And I don't regret my time with it. But I think I might be done with Gears of War, you know? Unless the sequels are actually a significant improvement in one way or another, I don't feel any great compulsion to play the rest of them. I'll probably just play this one again on the side and go, oh yeah, that was fun. And then I'll get to one of the frustrating bits and give up and probably play Space Marine again instead. I wish I was playing Space Marine right now, to be honest. Let that be the lesson. Space Marine.